The death of Jiraiya was a monumental moment in the Naruto series that forever changed Naruto Uzumaki as a character. As we all know, Naruto learned to deal with hatred and how to forgive those who had earned his hatred, which sent him down the path of being able to connect with Sasuke and eventually bring him back to Konoha. In part 1 of this series, we looked at how Jiraiya surviving the battle with pain, how the story would have changed. However, like usual, if you've not seen part 1 of this series, then I highly recommend doing so, because otherwise none of what happens in this video is going to make a lot of sense to you guys. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into part 2 of What If Jiraiya Never Died. In the aftermath of the Ninja War, Jiraiya would join Naruto and Sai on their S-rank missions to hunt down the rogue ninja like the Armament Alliance, who sympathized with Mamoru Chia's vision for the world, having a world without winners and losers. When Naruto was confronted by Garyo in the aftermath of the massacre of the incident of the Land of Waves, Jiraiya would be the one to speak up when Naruto seemed to falter, when Garyo spoke of how the war impacted the lives of innocent civilians, and when he spoke about why Mamoru Chia's ideology was the right and correct choice for the world to follow. After Naruto captures Garyo and has him sent to Otsutsuki Castle, Jiraiya would meet with Naruto at Zabuza and Haku's grave, and it will be here that Naruto will tell the story of Zabuza and Haku. Jiraiya would give Naruto a pep talk, reminding him that as someone who is close to one day becoming the Hokage, that it's important to remember the past. However, it's just as important to not dwell on it. The timeline will progress much the same up until the events of Naruto the Last. Instead of Shikamaru being chosen to lead the team, I believe that Jiraiya would be called out of retirement to lead Team 7 and Hinata on the mission to rescue Hanabi. It would be during the events leading up to the Genjutsu Lake that Jiraiya, being the savvy ladies man that he is, would notice the obvious way that Hinata was looking over at Naruto, and he would see how utterly densely pig-headed his student Naruto was to not notice Hinata's feelings. Being the overly lecherous man that he is, Jiraiya would likely make a comment about how nicely Hinata filled out as a young woman, or he would remark that he never expected her body to be so tight and voluptuous because she hid it under 9,000 layers of baggy clothing. To which at this point Sakura likely smashes Jiraiya over the head and then proceeds to smash Naruto for not keeping his sensei in check. The story will progress much the same as it did originally, with the only major changes being that when Naruto sulked around as he was wrapped up in his whirlwind of emotions about how he felt about Hinata and about Hinata agreeing to marry Toneri, Jiraiya likely pulls him to the side for a man-to-man talk. Jiraiya would tell Naruto that for years he chased after Tsunade, but in the end it was futile. Her lover, even decades after his death, still had Tsunade's heart. He'd explain that after coming back from the Rain Village and after everything died down after the 4th Great Ninja War, that Tsunade did finally give him the date that he'd been waiting all these years for. Jiraiya would state that he would always love Tsunade, and it was possible that some part of Tsunade might have been willing to love him as more than a comrade, but Jiraiya would state that he knew he was competing with the ghost and that he couldn't compete with the time that Tsunade had with Dan. Dan would always be her first choice, her first true love, and he wouldn't want her to settle for him when her heart rested with someone else, even if that someone else was dead in the grave. He'd bring up how he once told Tsunade that she never cried for him the way that she cried for Dan, and he compared situations to Naruto and Naruto's crush on Sakura, stating that unlike him, Naruto had someone waiting for him to grow over his boyhood crush. Sakura's tears would always belong to Sasuke, but Jiraiya would state just as Tsunade's tears will always belong to Dan. However, Jiraiya would then state that Hinata's tears would always be there for Naruto, and he'd say that the version of Naruto who was moping around wasn't worthy of those same tears. Jiraiya would say that the pupil of the legendary Toad Sage of Mount Miyaboku would be planning a daring rescue in order to save the princess who was his damsel in distress. He'd state that it would be in this moment that Naruto would become the hero of the story that was being written for Naruto and Hinata. Slapping Naruto on the back with his prosthetic arm, Jiraiya would point towards the moon and state that they were going to take back Hinata. The battle on the moon proceeds much of the same. However, Jiraiya would be too weak to contribute anything of importance to this battle. Instead, as Jiraiya saw Naruto utterly dominate Toneri in this battle, Jiraiya would smile knowing that his godson was indeed the person who would bring about peace to not just the world, but now that they're fighting on the moon, Jiraiya would wonder would Naruto bring peace to the entire universe. In the time after the events of Naruto the Last, Jiraiya would serve the role of being Naruto's Naruto's father at his wedding, stating that Naruto's parents would be proud of him and proud of the man that Naruto had become. As Jiraiya watched Naruto marry Hinata, Jiraiya would flash a wicked grin at Tsunade before looking back at his student. In typical Jiraiya fashion, in the hours after the wedding, no big-breasted woman in the attendance would be spared from his ogling stares and his lecherous comments. In the years afterwards, Jiraiya would be alive to see Naruto become Hokage, but as Naruto became more bogged down with his work as Hokage, Jiraiya would take a keen interest in Boruto Uzumaki. Unlike Naruto, who was too busy at first to notice the rapidly growing skill of Boruto, Jiraiya would quickly get flashbacks to Minato, especially around the time that Boruto began to use Lightning Release during the Hidden Mist Field Trip arc, and then after that arc attempting to use Wind Release. Jiraiya would take it upon himself to begin training Boruto personally, telling him of how much he reminded him of his grandfather Minato, and state that in time Boruto could potentially become a great ninja just like his grandfather, the 4th Hokage. Just as he went out of his way to teach Naruto overpowered jutsu, Jiraiya would do the same thing with Boruto. He'd teach him toad summonings, and eventually he'd teach him the Rasengan, meaning that before Boruto even graduates from the academy, he'd potentially already know the vanishing Rasengan. This means that Boruto likely heads into the Chunin exams with both a toad summoning as well as his vanishing Rasengan, but Jiraiya might even attempt to teach Boruto Sage Mode, which really depends on if you think Boruto has enough massive chakra reserves in the graduation arc in order to attempt to even learn Sage Mode. Now, I know that there was a Naruto OVA that absolutely forbade Sage Mode from being used in the Chunin exam, but as you guys know, I don't give a fuck about OVA, I don't give a fuck about any type of filler, so I'm not going to be including that in this scenario. So with that being said, if Boruto does know Sage Mode, then he very likely beats Shinki. Before Boruto cheated using Purple Lightning, Boruto's own Lightning Release Jutsu was enough that it began to crack Shinki's Iron Sand. If he goes into Sage Mode, there's no need for him to use the Scientific Ninja Tool, which I do believe he'd still be seduced into using due to wanting to gain Naruto's attention. However, because Jiraiya's been training him, I could also see Boruto having the Scientific Ninja Tool but not cheating constantly in the Chunin exams using that same tool. However, if he doesn't know Sage Mode, then Shinki wins the match because Boruto would be disqualified because Boruto would be using all types of jutsu and the Scientific Ninja Tools. Now, the battle with Momoshiki, Kinshiki, and Urashiki still takes place during the Chunin exams. Now, it's important to note that Jiraiya would be 69 years old, which would be the same age that Hiruzen Sarutobi was when he fought against Orochimaru during the Konoha Crush arc. I'm not saying that Jiraiya wouldn't attempt to help out with the fighting, however, I do think that expectations need to be laid out. I think Jiraiya's character needs to be brought into question here. Part of the reason why the 3rd Hokage did as well as he did versus Orochimaru was his high level of chakra control allowed him to spam several high level ninjutsu back to back to back, and after a while, Hiruzen's stamina did begin to wear out. Instead of jumping into the fight right away, I believe Jiraiya would observe the battles that break out, studying the way that Momoshiki absorbed chakra and the swift movements and the way that Kinshiki was able to move between various weapons as he fought against Sasuke. Once Naruto was captured, Jiraiya would get a gruesome flashback to his thoughts when he first learned that Minato died protecting the village from the Kyuubi. Vowing to never go through something like that ever again, especially not with his godson, Jiraiya would insist on traveling with Sasuke, Boruto, and the Kages in order to rescue Naruto. However, Jiraiya would do so already having summoned Ma and Pa Toad, which means that he would already have Sage Mode activated. Jiraiya would have no choice but to pace himself during the fights that broke out, but I do believe that Jiraiya offers quite a bit of help in these battles. If we take into account the novelization of the Boruto movie, then Momoshiki's weakness before he fused with Kinshiki was Taijutsu, which means that Jiraiya could be fighting alongside Naruto, Sasuke, Gaara, and Darui against Momoshiki. If we go by the manga version and the anime version of these events, then Jiraiya's best hope is to assist the Mizukage and the Tsuchikage in taking down Kinshiki. Jiraiya likely throws around some nature energy attacks when he fights against Kinshiki, as he serves as backup against the 2 Kages who would lead the charge against the Otsutsuki clan member. At some point, I do believe he used Frog Genjutsu to slow down Kinshiki enough for the two Kages to fully restrain him. However, once Momoshiki absorbs Kinshiki, a major change would occur. Momoshiki was still going to blitz the Kages. However, with Jiraiya being significantly weaker than the other Kages, Momoshiki's attacks would likely leave Jiraiya near death. Seeing Jiraiya struggling to breathe would send Naruto into an absolute rage, forcing him to enter into his chakra mode a lot sooner than he did originally. Sasuke would quickly follow Naruto's lead. Having a near bloodlusted Naruto fight against Momoshiki turns the battle a lot faster, despite Naruto being at less than 50% of his chakra and Sasuke being even more drained, since he would have had to teleport Jiraiya as well as Boruto himself and the other 4 Kages, as well as Katasuke and his assistant. Momoshiki would find it difficult to keep up with Naruto, whose punches would be powered by nothing but sheer guts as he fought in order to avenge his master, and these punches would come a little bit faster and they would hit a whole lot harder than they did originally. If Katasuke is still there, like I still believe he would be, then Boruto will be the one to finish off Momoshiki, which means that Boruto will still get the Karma Seal. However, it will be in the aftermath of this fight that Jiraiya will look at Boruto and realize that just like his father and just like his grandfather, Boruto was destined for great things. However, this fight would have proven to him that it was finally time for him to leave matters into the new generation of ninja, but seeing Boruto's relationship with Naruto mend itself and seeing how Boruto had begun to mature into being an actual ninja, Jiraiya would be inspired to write his next novel after he found the inspiration, of course, at the local bathhouse. Well guys, that's gonna be it for this What If today, and I'm gonna end this part of the series here because, just to be frank, Jiraiya is now in an age where there's not much he can contribute in the battles that are coming up ahead. However, I do think ending things off right here with Jiraiya being inspired to write his next novel is in character for Jiraiya, and I'd like to know what you guys think his next novel could be about. But as always guys, if you like anything I had to say, don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for watching on to the end. Have an awesome day guys.